But here's James Dolan to set the bar so low on, I don't even want to talk about this. I don't want our employees to talk about it. Here in this memo is us just hiding in the shadows while all these other sports organizations take 6 hours to craft these statements that say nothing unless you're the Sacramento Kings or in New Orleans. The owners need to start saying stuff. And here's James Dolan running in the other direction.
I spent so much of yesterday growing cynical about the entire press release industrial complex for the reasons you just said, Dan. There's a playbook. PR is the art of minimizing backlash. This is the equivalent, so often it felt like, of taking a selfie in front of a protest and then driving away in your fancy car, never to actually follow up with action. But then this happened. And last night, I live in New York City, right? Outside my window is Manhattan. There are riots, there's looting, all of that stuff can be condemned and understood in the same measure. But for me, I was curious, why is it that the Knicks had not released a statement of any kind? And after looking into the story more, it turned out that there is a real issue inside of Madison Square Garden right now, where the employees of Jim Dolan in the dozens are furious that they were silent. And it's because the bar was so low. And this is an organization, to be clear, that is very familiar and arguably numb to Jim Dolan being very Jim Dolan. He is, by many accounts, and I say this as a New Yorker, as a Knicks fan, ancestrally, the worst. I will disclose my bias in that case. But within the organization, there are employees who are really at their wits' end. And it's because they could not do the very minimum of acknowledging their pain, their suffering. They couldn't have a bit of empathy. And so if you can't do that, what does it say about the man you are? And that's where a lot of these employees find themselves still wondering today.
Normally, when Jim Dolan says anything, it is safe to assume he is entirely wrong. Honestly, it's almost kind of impressive at this point from a statistical standpoint. Like, usually it's almost impossible for an NFL team to go 0-16 because at some point sheer randomness sets in. Jim Dolan is the 0-16 of owners. But in this case, there is a tiny shred of veracity to what he said, which is this: he is not qualified to weigh in here. However, and this is the problem, he's also not interested in becoming qualified. He is not interested in listening to others. He is not interested in doing what the Washington Wizards did and letting his players speak for him. Look, a lot of these statements are terrible. They are banal. They are leaning on cliches. They are not using the important words that Dan used, police brutality, but they still matter. They matter internally, as Pablo laid out, to your own employees to show them that you give a bleep about learning. They matter externally. There is a reason why white athletes and celebrities are speaking up now, whereas they did not speak up when Trayvon Martin was killed, when Tamir Rice was killed, when Eric Garner has killed. The center is moving on this issue. And these corporate statements, as banal as they are, as useless as they are, as insufficient as they are, because they are far from enough, they signify to the masses that the center has moved. And if you are not there, you are in the extreme right now.
Do you see what she's saying there, Pablo, in terms of the difficulties of Dolan sort of navigating this entire thing behind the scenes? Because it is interesting, the point you were making on the radio, where you say basically James Dolan again exists to make all the owners look good because he looks so bad in the shadows.
Yeah, this is a bailout program of reputation. I mean, I don't know when you guys realized that the PR thing was getting tired and cliche and already you were growing cynical. But for me, it was when the company that makes Dungeons and Dragons released a statement. And I was like, I don't know if I needed to hear from the people who are responsible for role-playing fantasy games. But actually, to Mina's point, this is so disturbing. The conversation we're having, the lack of leadership we're having in this country at every level, it's so disturbing that it is so disturbing that it behooves even the D&D people to say something. And so for me, when it came to James Dolan and his inability to speak, look, there are many Knicks fans in my mentions, and my mentions, by the way, beyond being a typical Superfund site, are now like a confessional booth for all of these Knicks fans, which is both my nightmare and also my childhood. But what's happening now is that they are saying, but what about the fact that Jim Dolan has hired a lot of black people? He's empowered black people, and he deserves credit on that front, to be sure. Like what Jim Dolan says in the statement, actions are more valuable than words, is true. But the point is, read the room. Read the room. Understand that you are not just signaling externally, you are signaling internally. And what I think this comes down to, Dan, when it comes to why didn't Dolan do this, because this is a catastrophe of really unimaginable PR consequences at this point in time, it's because he is still afraid of offending the NYPD. And I understand that, right? I understand that there is a very fraught relationship between the owner of a business like Madison Square Garden, which has not paid taxes in 37 years, and the police force that protects it. But the fact that you can't call out the criminal acts within that body, that's where everybody is like, hold on. There is no more clear societal example where we've isolated that variable. I also think there is a fascinating checkmating of himself that's happened here. Because Jim Dolan, if he did not release this internal memo, which said the statement, quote, as companies in the business of sports and entertainment, however, we are not any more qualified than anyone else to offer our opinion on social matters. If he had not released a statement with that line in it, he could have then pivoted when the public pressure came, when questions followed, when players complained, when employees had meetings like they're having today without Jim Dolan, the equivalent of players-only meetings, except they're not players, they're employees of the CEO in this case. He could have pivoted. He could have done something. Instead, what we have now is a record that this is how he feels about this subject at the most tumultuous time possibly in our lifetimes, when it feels like 1968 or the closest that any of us could imagine it.
It's your fault. You outed him. You didn't give him the ability to pivot, doing your journalism for the first time in the history of this network.
That's right. And I wish it would have required more digging. I really do. But the people in that building,
You just fired a text off